Welcome to the Atheists of Florida YouTube channel. We are pleased to offer some of the most significant speakers and profound issues of our times. If you like today's video, please hit the like button. If you have already subscribed, thank you. If not, you know what to do.
Thank you so much, Judy. Along the way, I'm going to be talking about the Gainesville Humanistic Judaism Community, as well as the Florida Jews for Secular Democracy. But my purpose here today is to respond to your request to talk about humanistic Judaism, which is Judaism Beyond God. And so I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation. It'll take a little while, but there'll be lots of time for questions and answers. So can you see the screen right now? Great.
Yes, we can.
Super. So Rabbi Sherwin Wein, the founder of Humanistic Judaism, noted in the book Judaism Beyond God, we live in a world in which the professed beliefs of most people, including most Jews, are either non-humanist or anti-humanist. We live with the power of entrenched religious establishments that confer respectability upon those who join churches and synagogues and say they believe in God. We live with the indoctrination of the past, which claims that atheism and morality are incompatible, and that in a time of moral decay, only a renewed faith in traditional religion will rescue society from anarchy. We live in a world of aggressively proselytizing fundamentalists who have branded secular humanists the enemy of civilization. Unquote. It is in this environment that the humanistic Judaism movement has evolved, providing people with opportunities to celebrate Jewish culture and history and humanistic ethics without reference to God, to participate in congregations that help them lead lives committed to human dignity and social justice. So what is humanistic Judaism? We call it a non-theistic alternative in contemporary Jewish life, which was established in 1963 by the rabbi I just spoke about in Detroit. It's a humanistic religion in the sense that it's a community-based system in which people share beliefs and traditions and join together for ceremonial observances of the events of their lives. And that is, the word religion has become quite contentious in our movement, but that's the meaning of religion that we're talking about. The theme of humanistic Judaism is summarized quite well in a poem that is often used in humanistic Jewish congregation. It says, "Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you." So what do we humanistic Jews believe? We believe that people have the power and the authority to solve their own problems, independent of supernatural authority. We believe that reason, and particularly as it's reflected in science, is the best method to discover truth. Ethics derive from the human struggle and must serve human needs. Judaism is the culture and civilization of the Jewish people, and the Jews are united by ethnicity, culture, and shared history. And a Jew is any person who wishes to join the Jewish people, identify with its history, and share its faith, regardless of what he or she believes. What do we affirm? That the good life is the life of courage, where one takes personal responsibility for justice and accepts that this earthly life is the only life we have. Jewish history is a testament to the significance of human power and human responsibility. Jewish identity is best preserved in a free, pluralistic environment. And finally, the freedom and dignity of the Jewish people must go hand in hand with the freedom and dignity of every other human being. And you'll see here a picture of a Jewish Passover Seder with President Obama. And that doesn't necessarily follow our concerns for separation of church and state, but it still is meaningful. So are humanistic Jews believers? We say we are believers. We're not non-believers. We believe in the ability and moral responsibility of human beings to decide what is necessary to make a better society and to act based on those decisions. And here I am in Detroit attending the science rally, along with the board members of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Now, because some of you don't really have a deep understanding of what is Judaism, it's kind of hard to talk about humanistic Judaism without discussing Judaism as a religion or as a people, Jews as a people. So I'm going to give you a summary to a certain degree of a secular view of Judaism. So what is Judaism? Well, there are different ways of describing it. It's a civilization. It's a single people who became several nations, each with their own languages. It's a people. Jews are a people. Judaism is a religion. Judaism is a culture. And so you'll see here in pictures of different types of Jews, Sephardic Jews, those Jews who came from Spain or Portugal in the 15th, 16th century. In Bosnia, Sarajevo, there's a picture of the Napoleon from France
granting freedom to the Jews to become equal citizens in the late 18th and early 19th century. Here's a picture of Moroccan Jews who are in some ways quite different from other Jews. So, sorry. Oh, here I am. Okay, so as a people, Jews are made up of those who were born Jews, those who are descended from Jews, those who converted to Judaism. And it really doesn't require any particular belief or practice. There are about 15 million Jews worldwide. 43% of them are in Israel, and 43% were in the US and Canada in 2015. Judaism is monotheistic, except for humanistic Judaism, and it's based on religious, cultural, and legal traditions. It's made up of many different movements. Judaism is a culture. It's made up of traditions, practices, and cultural expressions that provide meaning and express identity. So what is Jewish culture? The way I describe it is it's religion and everything else Jews create and do. Religion and philosophy, art and architecture, music and dance, literature, media and cinema, cuisine and traditional dress, attitudes to gender, marriage and family, social customs and lifestyles. But we in humanistic Judaism tend to focus particularly on the secular Jewish culture. And that's focused on human beings. There's no reference to God. And there have been many secular Jews throughout history. And I'm going to talk to you
about a few of them. Philo, who was in the 1st century CE, that's this common era. He was a Jew who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and he viewed the Bible as an allegory to harmonize the Torah with Greek philosophy. We have Sarah Bernhardt, who was an actor in the French stage in the late 19th and early 20th century. And her heritage was Jewish. She was an atheist. Mosul Medicine, in the early 18th century, initiated the Jewish Enlightenment. And he said, the state has no right to interfere with the religion of its citizens, including the religion of the Jews. And he thought that still the rabbis have a right to punish Jews for deviating from Jewish law. He was the forerunner of Reform Judaism. Franz Kafka, you see a copy of his book, The Metamorphosis. He was a socialist and an atheist, lived in the early 20th century. He was an author of fantastic and realist paranoid literature, such as The Metamorphosis and The Trial. Allen Ginsberg, he was mid to late 20th century. He was a humanist, animistic, a Buddhist. He was part of the Beat Generation, considered himself part of the counterculture. He was a poet. He was a radical, politically radical. He campaigned for gay rights, and he was one of the pioneers for free speech. Stan Lee, you know him from Marvel Comics and all the Marvel films that have come out. He was an agnostic Jew, and he was an editor, film executive producer, and publisher. So in a previous presentation, I went over all of secular Jewish history, but it's just too much. So I'm going over just the 1800s through today. And in the 1800s, the Enlightenment that came out of Europe opened the doors to Jews in society. One of the major religious trends at that time was deism, which basically said God created the universe and then walked away and left it up to us to find what we want to do with it. The 1800s also included the acts of Mosul Mendelssohn to create the Jewish Enlightenment that I just spoke about. There were the French and American revolutions that reduced the power of religious leaders. There was the development of civil law and secular education associated with the movement towards secular nationalism. There was the Industrial Revolution, a greater focus on reason and science, and Jewish identity became a choice. Jewish intellectuals led a movement called the scientific study of Judaism. And basically it was a secular study of Judaism and Jewish history without reference to God. In the late 1800s, there were pogroms and the beginning of mass emigration from Russia and Europe. In the 1900s, there were economic crashes in the 1930s, strengthened anti-Semitism. Henry Ford was one of the most anti-Semitic. He shared the book called The Protocols of Elders of Zion, a book that was forged by the Russian czars to say that the Jews wanted to control all of society. Zionists and Yiddishist movements developed and competed with each other, each of them focusing on different aspects of secular Judaism. The Jews supported left-wing movements, socialism, Marxism. One of these was reflected in a group called the Jewish Bund, which was the communist Jews who favored Marxism in Poland and in the Soviet Union. Jews were very active in labor organizing in the U.S. But beyond that, there was the development of Nazism and then the Holocaust, which created enormous fear and disruption among the Jewish population. The Soviets, after the war, intensified their campaign of anti-Semitism against Soviet Jews. 1948, Israel was founded not by religious Jews, but by secular European Jews, many of them who were associated with atheism. Israel also was a experiment for socialism with the control of national industry and labor, as well as the kibbutzim, the agricultural settlements that were collectives. But in forming Israel, the secular Israelis made a deal with the Orthodox rabbis to give them control over family law, marriage, divorce, inheritance. And they didn't think it was a big deal in the beginning, but they've lived to regret it. With the creation of Israel, there were efforts to encourage Jews from all over the world to migrate to Israel. Large numbers of them left from North Africa, the Middle East, and other parts of the world. In the years since then, there's been enormous financial and political support by Jews from other countries, particularly those of US, to support Israel. Larger than the group AIPAC in terms of its political influence are now the Christian fundamentalists who support Israel. But Jews are well known for having many different points of view. And there were just a few, growing to many Jews who oppose the Israeli occupation of the Palestinians. And it continues to be a big issue within the Jewish community. Beyond that, in the late 80s and early 90s was the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and a large number of Soviet Jews emigrated to Israel and elsewhere. So what are the religious texts of the Jews? Well, first of all, there's the Torah, the 5 first books of the Jewish Bible. The Jewish Bible has many other types of books beyond it. There's the Mishnah and the Talmud, which are the interpretations of the Bible. And for Orthodox Jews, it's considered what they call the oral Torah. It was, to them, it was given by God and passed down orally so that the rabbis could develop that. The Talmud is the interpretations of the Mishnah, and there's interpretations and interpretations and interpretations. A different stream of Judaism is the mystic tradition, and that's reflected in what's called the Kabbalah. And one of the major books of Kabbalah is the Zohar. And the Orthodox believe that study is essential to being a Jew. Other Jewish movements believe it's important to study Judaism and Jewish people throughout life, but it's not an obligation. Okay, so what are some Jewish principles? Well, I'm going to go over some of them and tell you whether humanistic Judaism supports them. First is that the Jews are the chosen people of God. And that was based on a covenant from the Bible. And this is rejected by humanistic Judaism. Well, first of all, because we are not theistic. And secondly, we just think that this is a form of supremacism that's not particularly useful. The judgment day, the coming of the Messiah. But what that means is that Jews need to prepare for a day when God will determine their fate, and bring back all the dead. We reject this concept as well, again, because we are non-theistic, but we do believe that it's important only to focus on this life, because we don't believe that there is any other one. Halacha is Jewish law, and that is the law that is based on what the Orthodox consider to be the word of God in the Jewish Torah. And we reject this because we do not believe that the Torah was inspired by a God. And it's not to say that there aren't some good things within Jewish law, but we don't believe that it's binding. Prayer and rituals, that's done by most religious Jews, regardless of their movement. But we actually have our own liturgy which does not refer to God. It doesn't make any reference to the supernatural. Our liturgy is human focused. And finally, tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. And it's a concept that came out of Jewish mysticism, and basically that God dispersed himself, and it's up to Jews through their prayer and good deeds to bring him back together. But it's been picked up by much of the Jewish community as an important gesture of commitment to social justice. And we support commitment to social justice, but we believe it derives from human beings. Okay, so a bit about American Jewish religious denominations. First, not necessarily most important, but there's the Orthodox, and there are different types of Orthodox. There's modern Orthodox, there's ultra-Orthodox, or the Hasidim, there's a Sephardic, and they constitute about 9% of Jews in the US. And what they're trying to do is to abide by tradition and Jewish law, and follow Jewish traditions in both at home and the synagogue. The Sephardim from North Africa and Spain follow Jewish law and use the Orthodox approach to prayer, but they have different tradition. And the Hasidim often create enclaves for themselves that they emphasize charismatic leaders, and they link orthodoxy with mysticism. Sorry. Where am I? And so the conservatives, Jews, make up 17%. They accept Jewish law. They modify tradition, but they make sure that there's somewhat progressive approach to Judaism. Reform are is the largest movement with 37%. And they view Judaism as an evolving religious civilization, not a nation. They believe that sacred literature was written by humans, but inspired by God. And they accept only that Jewish law, which is reasonable and ethical. They're not wedded to ritual, and they become more traditional in recent years. They generally require or encourage that Jewish men wear head coverings when they're eating or in synagogue. No, Reconstructionists are part of other denominations, and they view Judaism as a civilization. It's a humanistic movement to them. Sorry, I'm going to have to restart. Okay. Okay, so you can see that? I guess so.
Yeah, sorry, I can't get myself unmuted. Yes, we can see that. Thank you.
Super, thank you. Reconstructionism has lots of different ways of thinking of religion, but they believe that religious language can be interpreted secularly. So they haven't given up the theistic language. They just say, well, it really is non-theistic. And Reconstructionist Judaism inspired the development of Jewish community centers. And but there are other denominations like Humanistic Judaism, which I've given you sort of an introduction to. But 32% of Jews as of 2020 consider themselves a part of no denomination. Basically, people who associate with the Jewish people with or without belief in God, and who don't attend Jewish religious institutions. So that's 32% the Jewish population in the US. So excuse me. So the Pew survey of 2020 found that 2.4% of US adults were Jewish, 0.6% of US adults were Jews of no religion. That Jewish adults constituted about 5.8 million people. In addition, there was probably, I don't know, about 1.5 million Jewish kids. But they also took a look at different ways that people relate to Judaism. First, if their people are of Jewish background, they're from Jewish families, but they might be in a different, they have a different religion. They might have two religions. Also, there are people who were not born Jewish, we call Jewish affinity, who consider themselves Jewish, either by religion or just because they're interested in it. So all that adds up to a lot of people who identify to some degree with the Jewish people. So of those Jews in the US, 73% consider themselves Jews by religion, and 27% consider themselves Jews of no religion. And the way the survey was put together was they said, what's your religion? And if you said Judaism, then you were Jew by religion. But if you said no religion, or you said atheist as your first religion, then they ask, well, what secondary religion do you identify with? And if you write Judaism, then you're a Jew of no religion. So that's the way they described. So 27% of Jews would not say that Judaism is their first identity as a religious identity. And this chart shows that among those who were 18 to 29, 40% consider themselves Jews of no religion, whereas over 65, 84% would consider themselves Jews by religion. But generally, the trend is more and more Jews consider themselves Jews of no religion. Okay, in terms of belief in God, the same survey shows that 22% of all Jewish adults do not believe in God. They neither believe in the God of the Bible, nor they believe in a God that is a higher power or a spiritual force. See that 26% believe in the God of the Bible. 50% believe in a higher power or a spiritual force. But the percentage of 22 that says that they don't believe in either is much higher than US adults as a whole, which is 10%. Basically 10% are atheist, agnostic, secular humanists. So Jews definitely are very inclined to become atheists and agnostics. Now, if you look at Reform, 21% of members of the Reform synagogues do not believe in God. 35% of those who have no denomination don't believe in God. So I thought you might be interested in that. Okay, is everybody getting the screen share? I see a chat note that
I just made Diane a co-host, so maybe that will open up the screen share to her. I don't know why.
It's just not opening for me. It might be that I have a very weak link
Mm.
or a weak connection.
Coming through very nicely. You're right.
you know, I'm going to be descriptive enough that you don't need to see it. So
Okay.
Yeah, he's pretty much, he's making
can
it very
understand
clear
what
what's on his share.
okay, so what does it mean to be Jewish? Well, to Jews in America, 53% believe that being Jewish is mainly a matter of ancestry and culture. In other words, it's not religion. It's not what you believe. It's who your parents were and what culture you share. In 2020, there were different types of qualities that were considered essential to being Jewish. The most important was remembering the Holocaust. Next was leading an ethical and moral life at 72%. 59% was for working for justice and equality in society. And 56% was being intellectually curious. And finally, there were others, but at 34% was having a good sense of humor. So that's important. What you don't see there is anything to do with God. So.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you, Rick, but I would think that everybody needs to remember the Holocaust, not just Jews. It's something that is important that all of us remember.
Yeah.
But
Thank you. Okay, so how did we get to humanistic Judaism? Well, there are lots of influences, but I'm going to divide them up into forerunners, precursors, and then developers. The forerunners were, among them, Epicurus, and he was in the 4th century BCE, and he believed that that our beliefs came from direct observation and logic, and that pleasure and pain are measures of what's good and evil, and that death is the end of the body and soul and should not be feared. He said that the gods neither reward nor punish humans, and the universe is infinite and eternal. Says that events in the world are ultimately based on the motions and interactions of atoms moving in empty space. So a very modern thinker. And then Moses Maimonides, who was in the 12th century, and with the rediscovery of Greek philosophy, he integrated that philosophy with Jewish ethics, and he attempted to show that scripture and reason are compatible. And he described the Bible as a metaphor and God as allegory. Now, the precursors, there are quite a few, and I haven't included all of them. Sorry. Starting with Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, was a secularist from the 17th century. He was a civil government theorist, and he was a materialist who was criticized by the church. He criticized divine revelation. He said only human reason counts, and he was criticized for being a so-called atheist and a blasphemer. Voltaire was in the 18th century. He was a deist, as I said. He believed that God had no role in the universe and society. He was anti-biblical. He attacked the Catholic Church and religious leaders. He criticized religious fanaticisms. He advocated freedom of religion and speech, as well as separation of church and state. But he also was anti-Semitic. So. Immanuel Kant, in the 18th century, said that reason is the source of morality. He criticized ritual, superstition, and a hierarchical church order. He rejected the possibility of theoretical proofs for the existence of God. He reduced religiosity to rationality. Thomas Paine, one of my favorites, was in the 18th century, was a deist. He wrote The Age of Reason, which was an assault on organized revealed religion that focused on the inconsistencies in the Bible. He promoted reason and free thought, and he argued against institutionalized religion in general and Christian doctrine in particular. Let's move on to the scientists. Galileo, you know pretty much who he is and what he did, but Newton laid out rationally understandable laws of the universe. Darwin, who was an agnostic, developed the theory of evolution, and he defended this theory against church criticism. Freud, who was a Jew, was a Jewish atheist. He said religious beliefs are illusion and that religion should be replaced by reason and science. Einstein was an agnostic or pantheist. He considered himself a secular humanist. He also was a socialist and a Zionist. He supported the ethical culture movement, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, which is a religion that's based on reason and non-theism. Baruch Spinoza was really a major player in Jewish thought. He was a pantheist. He viewed God as nature or more than nature, and he said God doesn't rule over the universe. He believed prayer was useless. He identified Torah's logical contradictions, and he declared that the Torah was not written by God. He challenged the fundamentals of religion, tradition, morality, and divinely constituted political authority, all in the 17th century. And for that, he was excommunicated from the Jewish people. Moses Mendelssohn, we spoke about earlier. In the 18th century, he brought the Enlightenment to the Jews. He argued that reason allows discovery of religious philosophical truths. And he was a forerunner of Reform Judaism. And then Felix Adler, who was the founder of ethical culture. He was a secular humanist Jew who rejected a personal God. Ethical culture rejects theology and unites theists, atheists, agnostics, and deists in a religion that's focused on ethics and action. And it's still around today. Kindred spirits and pathbreakers, Sholem Aleichem, who was a secular Zionist. He was a major Yiddish author focusing on shtetl life, and his stories were the basis for the musical Fiddler on the Roof. Martin Buber, who was a cultural Zionist and a modern philosopher. He was inspired by the Hasidim and Jewish mysticism, but he supported a republic in Israel that allowed both Arab and Jewish peoples to live together and develop freely. Mordecai Kaplan is the founder of Reconstructionistic Judaism. He was a humanist Zionist. He was excommunicated by a group of Orthodox rabbis, and he believed that Jewish practice should be reconciled with modern thought. He was particularly influenced by John Dewey to combine atheism with religious terminology. Simon Dubnov was a historian in the 19th to 20th century, and he was a religious agnostic. He wrote the history of the Jewish people, which was the first secular approach to doing a history of the Jews. And he supported Jewish autonomy in the diaspora, including groups like the Socialist Bund, and supported Jewish spiritual leadership. Ahad Ha'am, in the late 19th and early 20th century, was a secular agnostic. And he believed in a Zionism that is not based in a land, but basically is a culture. He had a secular vision of a spiritual center for the Jews. And he criticized the mistreatment of Arabs by Jewish settlers in Palestine and promoted the use of Hebrew and strengthening Jewish culture in the diaspora. Emma Goldman, who was an atheist and an anarchist and a feminist, resisted World War I draft. She was a labor organizer. She campaigned for free speech. She was critical of religion. And for all that, she was deported to the Soviet Union, where she criticized the Soviet government. Erich Fromm, a psychologist, psychoanalyst, he was an atheist, a socialist humanist, and he abandoned Jewish ritual and practice and believed that religion has humanistic and liberating aspects nevertheless. And he urged using reason rather than following authoritarian leaders. And then Hannah Arendt, who is a non-observant Jew. She was a Zionist, political theorist. She fled Nazi Germany and became a strong academic in the US. She viewed Jews as pariahs, she was rejected by the Jewish community for criticizing the cooperation of Jewish leaders with the Nazis and declaring that Adolf Eichmann demonstrated the banality of evil. Finally, Abraham Maslow, a 20th century secular Jew who was a humanist psychologist and founded humanistic psychology. So let's go into the development of humanistic Judaism, and I'm mindful of my time, and I'm going to aim for another 10 minutes or so. Secular Judaism developed particularly in Europe and in the US. It was a non-religious focus on Jewish culture. and there were different groups within it. The Yiddishists supported the use of the Yiddish language and secular Jewish culture. The Zionists supported immigration to a Jewish nation with a secular Jewish identity where they spoke Hebrew. In addition, there were socialists and left-wing groups that were neither one nor the other, and they were involved in labor organizing. The Holocaust led to a feeling of indifference of the universe to human suffering. To humanistic Jews, Jewish history is a testimony to the absence of God, and that returning to God or a view of human goodness is a denial of human dignities, that Jews need to take responsibility for their fate through humanism. Reform Judaism is a theistic movement, but it has a strong focus on reason and intellect, and it rejects divine revelation, and it de-emphasizes ritual and observance, focuses more on ethics than on law. So all of these led up to the efforts by Rabbi Sherwin Wine, to found humanistic Judaism. And he was a Reform rabbi in the Detroit or Ontario area. He founded the first congregation, Jewish congregation that focused on humanistic Judaism in Farmington Hills, Michigan in 1963. It was called the Birmingham Temple. And he founded the Society for Humanistic Judaism 1969 to spread humanistic Judaism in the US and Canada. He built links with Jewish humanists who existed in Israel and other parts of the world through creating the International Federation for Secular Humanistic Judaism, a rabbinical training center called the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, and then created the Association of Humanistic Rabbis. But he saw that this is not just a Jewish movement. He built links with non-Jewish humanist organizations, such as the Unitarian Universalist Humanists, Ethical Culture, the American Humanist Association, the Council for Secular Humanism. So the organizations today of the humanistic Judaism movement are the Society for Humanistic Judaism, which is the congregational arm, and it supports the humanistic Judaism as a movement, as well as congregations and study groups. Association of Humanistic Rabbis is a professional rabbinic organization that develops ethical positions, studies, and shares ideas to strengthen their movement. International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism offers training for Jewish rabbis, leaders, educators, and spokespersons, and is divided up into a group, one institution in the US and one in Israel. One in Israel is called Temura, and it trains secular humanistic rabbis and Jewish leaders. And so far they have ordained 50 Jewish rabbis, Jewish atheist rabbis in Israel. So let's talk about the communities in the US. There are 26 member communities of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Some of them are small, 10 family members. Some of them are relatively large. 167 is the largest. And the largest congregations are in Detroit, Chicago, Toronto, New York, Boston, Washington, D.C., Fairfield, Connecticut, and Minneapolis. But there also are members who are not part of congregations or study groups, and they are what we call independent or online members, and there are 181 of them. So in total, the movement has about 1,600 family members. There are other humanistic Jewish communities in North America outside the Society for Humanistic Judaism. One is the Congress of Secular Jewish Organizations, and that has 14 affiliates. There's the Workers' Circle, which is a Yiddish founded social justice organization that powers progressive Jewish identity. And then there are other humanistic Jewish communities that are not affiliated with the societies, such as my own Gainesville Humanistic Judaism Community, as well as ones in Atlanta and the one in Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg. Doug Zhang is a member of that one. And then there are former Society of Humanistic Judaism communities that were at once members and are still existing, but are not members, like in Washington, D.C. and San Diego. Okay, almost done. So going to talk a bit about these congregations and study groups and what they do and the types of focus that they have. So these congregations or study groups are open to families, singles, and partners who identify with the Jewish people, regardless of their religious belief, gender identity, sexuality, or marital status. And each of them sets up their own dues and tuition if they run a school. Their leadership varies. It could be formal, it could be quite informal. Some have rabbis, some have lay leaders. Most of them operate through volunteers. A few of them have paid administrators and teachers. Almost all of them rent space in buildings that are operated by other institutions. They like to celebrate Jewish and secular holidays. Jewish holidays like the Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, Passover, secular holidays like Darwin Day. And they do focus quite a bit on life cycle celebrations, births, mitzvah ceremonies, marriages, deaths. Some have schools, as I said, and these are humanist Jewish cultural schools, and they lead up to mitzvah ceremonies, which you might know as like a bar, bat mitzvah. The humanistic Judaism has its own, but with no reference to God and no reading from the Torah. And there's big focus on adult education regarding Jewish culture, history, ethics, humanistic Judaism, and lots of music, Jewish values. Depending upon how large they they might have clubs, all different types of clubs reflecting women, youth, social justice, community service, etc. The humanistic Judaism movement is very focused on social justice issues at the society level. It has supported many resolutions denouncing discrimination in foster care, calling for humanitarian policies for undocumented immigrants, condemning the rule that allows employers to deny birth control to employees, demanding a ban on assault rifles and high-capacity magazines, etc. In addition, the society signs on to amicus brief with secular groups such as Americans United for Separation of Church and State, American Humanist Association, and on different issues dealing with usually separation of church and state. About 3 years ago, society founded a project called Jews for a Secular Democracy. And this was a pluralistic advocacy and education initiative to mobilize Jews of all the denominations and no denomination to strengthen separation of church and state and to fight Christian nationalism. And recently, within the last couple of years, they made efforts to found state networks focusing on these issues. We in Florida are more advanced than others. There's ones in New York and Michigan. But some of the things that we've been doing is fighting for against some of the really terrible legislative initiatives that were proposed by at the instigation of Governor DeSantis, dealing with abortion, dealing with prayer in the schools, dealing with religious funding for religious schools, etc. So the society supports the congregations by preparing a magazine and other publications, developing a curricula that's humanistic for preschool to age 12, supporting the mitzvah programs, creating model liturgy that is humanistic for Jewish holidays, training the rabbinical and lay leaders, visiting the various congregations, operating communications and participation, media and social media, and then creating a program that focuses on humanistic Jewish role models. And some of these models over the last few years have been secular Jews such as Harvey Milk, Helen Sussman, Amos Oz, Grace Paley, Gene Wilder, Rosalind Franklin, Nora Ephron, Carl Sagan, Morris Sendak, Richard Feynman, Ernestine Rose, Betty Friedan, and Albert Einstein. I mentioned quite a number of organizations along the way, but these are some of them that are particularly close to the society just because of their focus on secular rights, the rights of people to live their lives of dignity without reference to God and without reference to religion. And I will skip over describing each of them and finish up with some speculation on the future of humanistic Judaism. First of all, the number of members has not increased much over the last 5 years, and I've been tracking that. There are a few communities that gain members, but a lot of them have lost, and there are increasing numbers of people consider themselves humanistic Jews, but independent of congregations. New communities have developed, but it's taking a while for them to develop. Gainesville Humanistic Judaism Community is 3 years old, and with COVID, it's been hard to continue to develop the numbers of people that we want to be sustainable. A lot of people are very committed to the movement, but some of these communities are losing members, particularly after the mitzvah ceremony. And also some people sort of age out because there are a lot of elderly or seniors participating in humanistic Judaism. There is a large amount of grant funding that's been found for the movement. And that was surprising because it was a challenge to find ways to sustain the movement and financially in the face of reducing numbers of members. So the future of humanistic Judaism, I would say it's a good place for intermarried Jews and atheists, agnostics, and secular humanists who want to maintain links with Judaism. It's not certain that a congregational model really will continue to work, but we'll see. But humanistic Judaism is being accepted more by Jewish communities. It was rejected when it started in the early 60s. How could there be an atheistic rabbi, etc.? And humanistic Jews are really helping to develop the Jewish people by appreciating the intersectionality and multiple identities of Jews. And finally, we're hopeful that non-Jewish humanists, atheists, and agnostics like those in this group will increase their understanding of their links to Judaism and other religions. Thank you. Up for questions.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. We'll open up for questions. We do ask that you use the electronic hand to ask a question because we can't always see you on the screen. And to get to it, in case you don't know, is down in reactions. There's a thing that says raise hand. So I see we have John Reitken, if you would like to, sorry if I'm butchering your name, but please go ahead and make your comment or ask your question.
Well, Rick, twice in your history, you mentioned excommunication, which I guess is interpreted as kicking someone out of a group. Or maybe cancel culture or whatever, suggesting that these individuals who came up with pretty, at the time, radical views were still part of a group that they not only identified with, but participated with. It's a funny word, excommunication, to talk about that. And so people like Moses, Mendelssohn, and others obviously were part of a minority, and minorities generally have to stick together to face threats from the majority. And so I'm just curious about this use of the word excommunication. The other aspect has to do with people who often are interested in it philosophically, but the idea of joining a group is sometimes antithetical to the kind of independent thinking. And finally, someone brought up Thomas Jefferson, which I think is an interesting point. But anyway, we can talk about that. But just if you'd like some comments on that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Regarding excommunication, when Spinoza was excommunicated in the 16th century or so, there was no community that was neither Christian nor Jewish. And so excommunication by the rabbis meant that he basically was isolated, completely isolated socially. Moses Mendelssohn, when he came to Germany and was excommunicated by the rabbis, at least there was some acceptance within the Christian community and a certain amount of secular society. So those were, it was a little easier for him, although still difficult. And there have been efforts by many Jews over the years to convert to Christianity in order to improve themselves in terms of society and business. What they generally do is go into this sort of secular community. My dog was barking, so I didn't hear your second question about membership.
Well, the tendency that the idea of joining a group is when you're kind of anyway, no, it's an interesting factor. Obviously we work in groups, we're social animals, and so it's nice to identify with it. And when the identity is with something that one does not believe, as opposed to one believe. But anyway, I think the emphasis on ethical culture, ethics, morality, and reason are sufficient forces for unity. That's fine. And Jefferson had his Bible, someone pointed out.
Well, yeah, I mean, Jefferson is always pointed to as the one who officially acknowledged in a letter that there was a wall of separation between church and state. And so, you know, he's highly regarded by humanistic Jews for that reason. And particularly, you know, Jews for Secular Democracy is meant to create a Jewish voice for separation of church and state, recognizing that the Jews have various reasons in terms of their history and experience to say why separation of church and state is important. And Jefferson and Washington, when he recognized the Jewish role in the U.S., showed that the U.S. was meant to be a place where people of all religious beliefs and no religious beliefs could feel comfortable.
Well, I'm the one who brought up Jefferson, and the reason I did it is if the Christians can claim Jefferson, I don't see why the Jews can't claim him too. Jim
Well,
Young,
I would say he was Jewish, but he's important.
hey, he identified with you. Jim Young.
Looking back through my lifetime at various oppressed groups and thinking about the history of Nazism, the Holocaust, and it has always been confusing to me why Jews are an oppressed group. I don't know of myself, I don't know of any evil that Jews or the Jewish communities have done to deserve to be vilified and ostracized and hated so much as to want to exterminate them. And no one has ever been able to enlighten me as to a good reason for this. I just wonder if you have anything that you could share about this as to what motivates people to take a stance of hate against Jews and the Jewish community. And also the other thing that's confusing to me is that Christian nationalists, they are Christian fundamentalists, and for selfish reasons, they support Israel, but at the same time, they're anti-Semitic. And it's a contradiction. And I don't get it.
Yeah. There's a book that I really liked called Anti-Judaism. I forgot the name of the author, starts with an N, and it traces anti-Semitism back to before Christ, among the Greeks and Romans during that period, you know, and without necessarily reference to Christianity, but you know, a lot of it has to do with the Jews as a minority, and who are unhappy about being treated as an oppressed minority. So, but the way that it's described in the Jewish community is that society opens up and then could turn against the Jews at any moment. And it leads to some very heated dialogue, debate within the Jewish community, whether anti-Semitism is here to stay, whether you look at anti-Semitism based on violent acts against Jews, or harassment, or whether you look at how welcome Jews are, and fact that more than 50% of Jews intermarry in the US kind of indicates that they're being welcomed, at least by their partners. And there was a poll in 2017 that compared different religious groups and how well they were liked by Americans, and Jews were liked the most by any other of any group. They were liked the most. At the same time, the number of incidents of anti-Semitic abuse or violence have increased significantly. So is the US becoming more anti-Semitic or not? And then there are the efforts of some in the Jewish community to try to expand the concept of anti-Semitism to anti-Zionism or criticism of the Israeli government in a certain way. And so that also is a heated issue in the Jewish community.
Okay, Jim Peterson, I accidentally lowered your hand. If you want to ask your question, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, this has been a very enlightening experience, and I was wanted to ask about the static nature of the present membership of the Jewish humanist movement. I've been a strong supporter of it, and as well as the entire humanist movement. I was a leader of several organizations, and unfortunately, the pandemic has had a tremendously bad effect on membership and on meetings and so forth. So I think we're going to have a long time recovering from it. I wonder what your what your impression is of that situation. Is that, do you think, the main reason for the static nature of it, or are there other reasons?
Well, I think it was occurring before the pandemic hit, and it has in some ways to do with the fact that congregations don't necessarily meet the needs of young people, and they are they're important for seniors, but for young people, for people who are married but don't have kids of age 6 through 13, there really isn't an incentive to join a community that requires funding, dues, or requires construction payments and things like that. There's no obligation. There's no religious obligation for people to join a congregation. You can't say God is telling you to, or it's your religious duty. There has to be another reason. And so, we're trying to take a look at the movement from a different perspective, that it's not just people who are members of congregations or study groups. It's also those who identify as humanistic Jews, those who participate in social media, those who represent themselves as humanistic Jews in other movements. So it's looking at things from a wider perspective. So, even though we have 1,500 paying family members, that really underestimates the whole movement.
Just one more small remark, and that is we had the privilege of meeting Sherwin Wine, and he was one of the most dynamic and charismatic figures I've ever met. It's unfortunate that he died in Morocco at such a relatively young age, but he still had things to contribute. But he's a wonderful person. Read his books.
We say it's young when he's over 80, but
he seemed younger.
Yes, he did. Amy, thank you, Jim.
To Jim Young's question, what I have always heard is that the cause for anti-Semitism is not unique. There's a us and them kind of mentality amongst the human species that always seems to rear its ugly head, and where there's a little bit of criticism, so much gets invented even further, and that just our existence is a reminder to the Christian world that, hey, we rejected him then and we're still around, that you didn't take over the entire world, that all of Christendom, as they said, still had a few Jews in there. Anyway, I like some of the lectures very much that the humanistic Jews have produced, and speakers, and very interesting. But I myself don't find a need for the group because, part of me looks as my Jewish education was a little bit, I can look at it as trauma, childhood trauma, that I was told lies and lies and lies and lies over and over again. And I don't want any part of it. I'm always going to call myself a Jew until anti-Semitism disappears, right? But otherwise, the Passover to me is now a horrific event. It's the actual, the straw that broke this camel's back in terms of I said, okay, that's it, no more. I can't call myself a Jew anymore. I just don't believe in this type of worship of such a egocentric God and without self-esteem. Anyway, so to me, I don't have any affinity for the traditions or so forth. Although, when I went to a bar mitzvah, I went to my cousin's bar mitzvah, I won't not go. And I'll sing along just because it's music, and music does that to me and to many people. I just have to. I think if I knew some of the hymns that, I had a Jewish English boyfriend who knew so many Church of England hymns because he went to a boarding school, and it was pretty much considered, curriculum there to attend Sunday services. And while he didn't believe in what he was doing, he learned the hymns again because they sing them, and they're catchy tunes, some of them. But
when I was living in the Philippines, I was expected by my office to put on a Christmas party, and one of the games that they played was how many Christmas songs can you sing without running out of songs, and I did pretty well. So.
Yeah, in camp we called those sing downs, but yeah, for me, I'm just pretty much done with that. Although sometimes I feel like I've heard Seinfeld say it in terms of there's a sensibility, that cultural sensibility that every Jewish kid gets raised with, that no matter how much you're still gonna you're gonna get it, so.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.
Shirley.
Hi, Rick, I want to thank you. You do such a great job of bringing some history and culture, just knowledge to us who have a quest for knowledge. But there are other religions who have a branch to them. There is a Sunday assembly out here that is a break off from the Unitarian Church, and they believe no creed. This is our life. This is our only life, and we must be kind one to another. But do you not see any power in uniting the different humanist organizations eventually to fight for justice and fight for the same causes each one is speaking that they do? What is the holding on to Christian or Judeo background and rituals, but call oneself humanist and not want to all be humanists together?
That's a good question, but there are organizations that bring together groups. There's the Secular Coalition of America, there's American Humanist Association, and there are groups that bring together religious and non-religious, advocating for separation of church and state. Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Is it wrong that there be Black non-believers and military atheists and free thinkers and Jewish and Unitarian? I think that's pretty good, but I think there is a common interest that's seen by many of these groups. Also, I spoke about Sherwin Wine, and he developed a common training for rabbinical and non-theistic leaders. So even at that time in the, I don't know, 70s or whatever, there was a recognition that humanism is universal for many different groups, and just because humanistic Judaism evolved from Judaism doesn't mean that it's the only way to look at things. So.
Thank you.
Shirley, did that answer your question?
Well, it still leaves a lot to be desired as far as uniting with others of like views to build more power to the whole movement in some way.
Yeah. I think coalition building is something that we all have to work on. But thank you very much for your question, Shirley, and Rick for your answer. Doug?
Yes, hi. So I have a bunch of comments about various threads that people have raised here. The question came up, why are Jews so persecuted, and why have they historically been kind of this underdog culture? And I just recently finished reading Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, and that is a fascinating book that looks at why society tends to break out, have this sort of untouchable class, comparisons between obviously the African-American slaves and African-American culture, post-slavery, Jim Crow, all in the United States, Jews throughout European history and Nazi Germany. India has its Dalits, the lower caste. And so I found that to be very intriguing as a way of explaining why human society tends to want to find a scapegoat and find a group that they can kind of turn into their untouchables, unwanted. So just that thought. Thank you, Rick, for making a little shout out to my group, which unfortunately we have a group, the Humanistic Jews of Tampa Bay. It was kind of an informal meetup group, and we've kind of gone dormant now. There are 3 of us that have been sort of the main organizers, and we all have busy lives and have kind of put things on hold, and COVID, as somebody had mentioned earlier, has not helped things. So, I don't know what the future of our group is going to be. It's been hard to get, Rick knows full well because he has his own group in Gainesville. It's hard to find people to kind of take the reins and, actively participate in things. But we do have a bunch of us that have met in the past. It is, the Humanistic Judaism movement is an older movement. There's a congregation down in Sarasota that unfortunately they're literally dying off, as Rick had alluded to. Most of their members are probably in their 70s and 80s, and there has not been any kind of new blood of younger people joining. I think a lot of that is that Those of us gray hairs grew up at a time where atheism was stigmatized, and we just didn't have the societal acceptance. Whereas nowadays, I think for a young person in their teens or 20s or 30s, there's not a lot of stigma attached to being a nun or an atheist or an agnostic. And I think that is one big factor in general. I mean, if you look even at the group of people assembled tonight, I'm probably one of the younger folks in the bunch. So that's kind of a factor too. So just a whole bunch of random things that I just wanted to kind of chime in about, but you did a great job, Rick. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. And, another area that I focus in is on caste. I'm the board chair of the International Commission for Dalit Rights, and we are very cognizant of Isabel Wilkerson's book, and we think that she doesn't get it exactly right. But one issue that we are focusing on, and we talk about anti-Semitism, is that there's starting to be an awareness of caste discrimination in the US, and we are reaching out to federal institutions like the EEOC, the Department of Justice, Department of Labor, to help them to understand how to deal with it, particularly in the IT industry. Because when South Asians came here, they not only brought their religion, they also brought their social discrimination. So
Thank you, Doug. Linda.
I kind of read a little bit about the history, and it seems to be the persecution of Jews is not so much, there was no real persecution of Jews in Far Eastern countries. And in fact, when a group of Jews were fleeing eastward from Hitler and they landed in Japan, the Japanese government actually gave them asylum, even though they were allied with Hitler. It seems to be that any persecution of the Jews in Far Eastern countries has to do more with them being communist, like communist China. Yes, they'd pick on religious Jews because the communist China picks on every religion. Whereas in the West and in Islamic countries, the persecution of Jews is religion-based. Like in the West, I'm not saying I subscribe to these views personally, but Jews were always portrayed as the Christ killers in the Christian countries. And in the Islamic countries, it was the story between Isaac and Ishmael, and the two brothers fighting. So, so the persecution of the Jews is in the countries that are connected to the, how do you say it? The Judeo-Christian monotheism, like the Abrahamic monotheism. Because if you look at the democratic countries in the Far East, they don't persecute Jews. Like Japan has no history of persecuting Jews.
It's quite complex, and you're right to point out the countries that gave rescue to Jews during the Holocaust. Recently, there was a report on Jews taking refuge in the Philippines during that time. But you really have to look at the society as a whole over history and think about, whether where the Jews fit in. There are a lot of Jews who moved into India. There are Jewish communities on the coast of India. They seem to live quite peacefully, but they also emigrated to Israel. So, the reasons for emigration are complex. I'm a specialist in the Jews of Morocco, and I have a website that takes a look at why 300,000 Jews in 1948 went down to 3,000 or less today. If every Jew and every Muslim say they got along really well. So,
Yeah, I've
was-
heard of that one. Yeah, I've heard of that Exodus. Yeah, the Moroccan Exodus. Yeah. I remember seeing some sort of documentary on it, and they were interviewing the Moroccans, the older Moroccans who were in the one time in the villages that had these Jewish neighbors, and they all were like, we don't understand what happened. We don't understand. Like the villagers themselves honestly said, well, we were getting along okay with these people. We don't understand. I think it was the Moroccan government rather than the people themselves, wasn't it? Or am I wrong on that one? I could be wrong on that one.
well, I'll point you to my website. I'll just put it in.
Okay, sure.
And you'll see the multiple factors. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
But
Linda.
yeah, okay, where do I?
Any other questions for Rick? I will tell you that I was raised in a fundamentalist church, and we were taught that the Jews killed Jesus. And even though that's obviously not true, even if Jesus, I'm not even sure Jesus ever lived, but that was one of the reasons that Jews were hated. And the other had to do with, if I understand correctly, Christians weren't allowed to be money lenders, but Jews could be. And that there was a lot of buildup of animosity about that kind of thing, of charging interest and stuff.
yeah, as well as, in many societies, Jews were the ones that were required to collect the rents for the monarchies. So that's not a position that makes people trust you.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. All right, any other questions anyone has? No. Well, I really appreciate, Joe, were you going to ask a question? Okay. Really appreciate your being here and giving us such a great presentation, and not only of a background in Judaism, but especially about the humanistic Judaism and the secular Jews. So I'm just really appreciated. I do think that all of us have to work on building coalition, and because honestly, when you describe what humanistic Judaism stands for, it basically describes what our group stands for. Even though we're not identified as a humanist group, we're an atheist group. We adopt many of the humanist principles. Most of our members are humanists, and it really meshed really well. So I hope we can work together on issues in the future, especially church-state separation issues.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about humanistic Judaism. And, it helps me to spread the word.
Yes.
So, if anybody is interested in following up with me, I put my email address, and there also is in the announcement ways of finding out more about the society and the Gainesville Humanistic Judaism community. And I'm a point of contact for humanistic Judaism groups around the country, so I can, if you have somebody who's interested somewhere else,
we have people all over join us from everywhere. Linda, in fact, is in Canada. Amy, you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I just wanted to follow up on something that I had mentioned last week. That's okay.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, and we'll go ahead and close down the meeting, and appreciate your time and effort on this. You went to a great deal of effort. And
well, one second. I just wanted to say, I don't know if you all were aware that I had put in a complaint with the Pinellas County Sheriff's Department that the oath I had to take as a deputy, poll worker, which I did this past Tuesday, had a "so help me God" at the end. And I immediately lowered my hand and said, I can't do that. And the instructor just said, don't worry about it, just whatever. Well, I called and I found out that that oath actually comes from the sheriff's department. So I called Mr. Gualtieri's office, and there was no getting through. They just wouldn't put me through to him. And I finally explained what I was calling about, and nothing. He said, well, did you file a complaint? So I finally got the call back 2 days after election day, or the primary, and the response I got was, the oath stands as is.
Well, you need to send me this information and we will write them.
Well, okay. And I have one more question, because I called Americans United, or actually sent them an email through their website, and boy, their attorney got back to me real quick. And he said, look, he says, first thing you have to ask, is there an alternative? He says, if they say no, call me right back. So he was interested.
Okay, good.
So,
Good.
yeah.
Well, then
Usually they won't allow you to affirm. I so affirm.
Yeah. Usually they have, well, I noticed that somebody, one of the legislatures was doing, I swear or affirm, and then at the end he put, so help me God. And you can't affirm to a God, you can only swear to a God. But they still added that at the end of their oath. But yeah, it's something that needs to be addressed for sure. I'm glad you called Americans United.
Hey, Amy.
Yeah.
If I may chime in, so there is a woman running for the State House in Seminole County, up in the Orlando area. Her name is Henry. What's her?
Sarah Henry.
Sarah Henry, thank you. And she has promoted the fact that she is a humanist and a non-believer. And so you will have somebody that I'm hopeful that she will win election. She's running as Democrat. If she does get elected, I think she might be a very worthwhile individual to contact about statewide legislation in this regard. She would be a very receptive legislator to promoting.
I'll make note of her, yeah.
Because that would be that to me would be, getting somebody at the statewide level that might be supportive of you.
Yeah, I also left voicemails for both my Florida senator and my Florida House of Representative in the House, but I haven't gotten calls back from them. But this all happened, this call came to me Thursday. So I was like, whoa, I was, it took me a while to recover actually from election day, but yeah, I said, I think that's interesting. Sarah Henry, you said, yeah.
I just put her website.
Oh, cool beans.
Yeah, and I'm in touch with her directly, Amy. So I did a fundraiser. I helped with a fundraiser for her.
Okay.
So I can get you in touch with her directly. But also the ACLU is another good resource.
What's interesting is that this sheriff, I've volunteered for campaigns in the past, but I've never actually put my money where my mouth is, I guess. And I actually contributed to the campaign. I don't care if it was Daffy Duck running against this Gualtieri, but I contributed against him. He's also got a law degree.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he should be very familiar with the Constitution, And when I asked his, whoever called me, I have his name, who called me and said, as is, I said, well, what about the constitutional separation of church and state? He said that he just repeated to me over and over again, the oath stays as is, or stands. That's how he said it, stands. The oath stands. I said, okay. And that's not coming from you. That's coming from the sheriff. He says, yes. I said, okay. He says, I am just the messenger. I said, okay.
Yeah. The Christian nationalists are everywhere.
Oh, and he is just, it has nothing to do with Christianity. He's a bully. He's a big bully.
Aren't
And
they
he
all-
swore his department would never wear body cams. That was one of the things that he ran on. And guess what? They're wearing body cams.
Hmm. Okay, Amy, Linda, you had something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell an amusing story about the Spinoza. Apparently, Spinoza had an older Dutch Christian woman who lived in his apartment building, and for some reason, she saw him as being somewhat, having magical powers or some like a wise man, and she asked him, "Will Jesus let me into the afterlife?" And in order to just make her feel better, he said, "Yeah, he will." And he did, and because she saw that this guy was very wise, and she thought he was like a mystic, which is kind of ironic. And then he says, "Yeah, okay, yeah, Jesus will let you into you're good with Jesus, relax." I thought that was a pretty funny story.
That reminds me, Rick, you said something, and I don't mean to keep you too long, but you said something about God. This isn't the right word, but dissipated, or that Jews think that God kind of dissipated and went away after he created us. Did I understand that correctly?
I remember saying something like that, but I thought that maybe that had to do with the deists, but I can't remember.
Oh, okay. All
It
right.
did. It was about the deist belief.
Okay. I was thinking you related to Jewish belief, but okay. Yeah, the deists do believe that. But, all right. Well, thank you all very much. And if there are no more questions or comments, we'll go ahead and end this meeting. And Rick, I look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks, Rick.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thank Judy.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Judy.
You're welcome, Joe. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you. See you next time.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
If you are pleased with our programs, please tap the like button and then subscribe to our channel. Don't forget the bell so you don't miss any notices of new material. We usually post new content every week. See our created playlists to discover events thus far this year, or to see a list of topics and speakers from our rapidly growing and diverse collection since 1992.